Thank you for joining me today. My name is Tiffany Mason, and today we'll be discussing multimedia learning. Topics that we will be covering include Richard Mayer, multimedia learning, Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning, and Mayer's 12 principles of multimedia learning. Who is Richard Mayer? Richard Mayer is an American educational psychologist and professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Mayer has made significant contributions to theories of cognition and learning, especially with design and educational multimedia. He may be most popular for his multimedia learning theory. So what is multimedia learning? And what is cognitive theory of multimedia learning? Watch this short clip of an interview with Richard Mayer as he explains.
Okay, well, all I mean by multimedia instruction is using both words and pictures with the intention of helping people learn. So by words, I mean either spoken or printed text, and by pictures, I mean still graphics such as illustrations, photos, charts, graphs, or dynamic graphics such as video or animation. So if you're using both words and pictures and putting them together to try to help people learn, I think then you're engaging in multimedia instruction. So I would say the reason for being interested in multimedia instruction is that it has potential to improve student understanding. And if we're interested in performance on transfer tests, we want people to understand deeply, then using both words and graphics might be a way to accomplish that. So I call that the multimedia principle. People learn better from words and pictures than from words alone. And the rest of my research has been focusing on, well, what's the best way to incorporate words and pictures? Because it's not just any picture and any set of words, but what's the best way to design instruction with words and pictures? So I think that's my reason for kind of being interested in multimedia learning is it's been demonstrated to greatly improve performance on problem-solving transfer tests. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning is basically taking the information processing model that really has been around since the late 60s and even before, and just adapting it slightly to an educational setting. The idea is that information comes in from the outside world. It first impinges on our eyes and ears and enters sensory memory. So we might have kind of a photograph kind of view of the world through our eyes and auditory echo through our ears, but that information fades very fast, so we have to pay attention to it. So the first real cognitive step is selecting the relevant incoming information for further processing. If we pay attention to some of that information in sensory memory before it fades away, it goes to working memory, which is a very limited capacity store. And in working memory, we can mentally rearrange the information. So the next step really there is to organize the information in some meaningful way. And then also activate relevant information from long-term memory, bring it into working memory and integrate it with the incoming information. I call that integrating. So the three main memory stores are sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. All the kind of learning activity is in working memory, where we have to select the relevant information, mentally organize it, and integrate it with relevant prior knowledge. So according to this theory, meaningful learning depends on being able to carry out those three important cognitive processes.
Let's explore how the brain processes information. Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning is based on three main assumptions. The first assumption is that there are two separate channels: an auditory channel for processing spoken words, music, and other auditory elements, and a visual channel to process words, pictures, and animations. The second assumption is that each channel has limited capacity. Learners can only take in little pieces of new information at a time. The last assumption is that learning is an active process of selecting, filtering, organizing, and integrating information based on prior knowledge. So, what does this process look like? Learners will view the multimedia presentation of words and pictures while their brains are working hard to help them understand and remember. The brain has three types of memory: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory filters the information that is being presented. Auditory information will filter any narration or music into the auditory channel, and images or text will be filtered by the visual channel where it is briefly stored. The brain will then start to work with this information in order to process it for learning to begin. In the working memory, the learner chooses relevant sounds and images that are then organized into separate models that help the learner to understand and remember the information that they just received. The learner then integrates the separate models with prior knowledge and experiences. Once all of the information is combined, the new knowledge can then be moved into long-term memory. Students do not automatically retain and remember information that is presented to them. Their brains are actively filtering, selecting, organizing, and integrating information. Learning is an active and complex process, as you can see from the diagram. Due to limited capacity of the two channels, a potential problem is cognitive overload. Cognitive overload occurs when too much information is shared with the learner simultaneously, and the information overloads a learner's working memory. This results in the learner not being able to process the information. This can cause frustration, can cause the learner to tune out all new incoming information, or just give up on learning the new information. So, what can you do to help reduce cognitive overload and maximize learning? Mayer's book, Multimedia Learning, explains the best way to create multimedia learning materials to reduce cognitive overload and maximize learning. Today, we will cover Mayer's 12 principles of multimedia learning. The first 5 of Mayer's principles are ways to reduce extraneous processing. They are the Coherence Principle, Signaling Principle, Redundancy Principle, Spatial Continuity Principle, and the Temporal Continuity Principle. Let's take a closer look at these 5 principles. The Coherence Principle states that people learn better when extraneous words, pictures, and sounds are excluded rather than included. According to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, learners are constantly trying to make sense of the information that they are being presented. Learners are selecting relevant information, organizing this information, and then linking it with previous knowledge. Adding extraneous information, even if it is interesting information, can result in the student not understanding because there is too much information being presented on the page or screen at one time. The saying that less is more definitely applies when you're using the coherence principle. Do not add extra words, images, or unneeded sounds or music. Cut the fluff and keep your content simple and to the point. As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the coherence principle, whereas the other image has extraneous words and images that are not necessary and can distract the learner from the most important information. The signaling principle states that people learn better when cues that highlight the organization of the essential material are added. There may be some situations where it is hard to remove extra words from a lesson. The signaling principle is the answer to this problem. There are several ways that you can do this in your lesson. You can highlight important words or phrases. You can use arrows to highlight important aspects of the information, or you can highlight your mouse cursor so that it is easy for students to follow on the screen. You can also use your voice to highlight and emphasize certain words by saying them a little bit louder or adding emphasis. The point of signaling is to focus the attention of the learner on what is important so that they are not wasting time processing extraneous material.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the signaling principle by highlighting the most important words that are presented on the image, whereas the other graphic does not.
The redundancy principle states that people learn better from graphics and narration than from graphics, narration, and on-screen text. If the same information is presented in multiple ways at the same time, the working memory becomes overloaded, and the learner has fewer cognitive resources for making connections between the words and pictures, and therefore very difficult for meaningful learning to take place.
In this example, the image highlighted in green follows the redundancy principle by not including on-screen text, whereas the other image includes the redundant text that is the same information that has just been narrated.
The spatial continuity principle states that people learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far from each other on the page or screen. This principle goes back to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, that learning is an active process, and the learner is trying to make sense of the information that they are seeing and hearing. By using this principle, you are placing the words and pictures in a way that promotes learners to make the mental connections they need for learning to take place. They can focus on learning instead of trying to figure out what words go with what image.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the spatial continuity principle by having the image and the text near each other rather than from far away from each other on the presentation as the other image has done.
The temporal continuity principle states that people learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented simultaneously rather than successively. The successive presentation of the information allows learners to devote their full attention to the audio presentation of the material first, and then give their full attention to the visual presentation that follows. The temporal continuity principle does not contradict the spatial continuity principle. Rather, they complement each other, according to Mayer.
In this example, the image highlighted in green follows the temporal continuity principle by presenting the image and letting the learner listen to the narration. The other image does not present the information in this way.
Mayer's next three principles are ways to manage essential processing. They include the segmenting principle, the pre-training principle, and the modality principle. Let's take a closer look at these three principles. The segmenting principle states that people learn better from multimedia lesson that is presented in a user-paced segments rather than as a continuous unit. Segmenting is a technique that helps learners manage essential cognitive processing because the instructor can break their lessons into smaller segments that are more manageable when their learner is in control of their learning. The learner is not forced to move on to the next lesson before they have had enough time to process the new information that they were just presented. The segmenting principle is very helpful when teachers are teaching complex information that may be difficult for the learner to comprehend and understand if given all the information at the same time.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the segmenting principle because it allows the student to control their learning by giving them control of the play button. This allows them to review the information as many times as necessary before moving on to new information.
The pre-training principle states that people learn better from a multimedia lesson when they know the names and characteristics of the main concepts. The thought behind this principle is that the instructor gives the learner basic knowledge before the actual lesson so that they are not overwhelmed with all new knowledge and new technology at the same time, causing cognitive overload. If the learner already has basic knowledge before the actual lesson begins, this will allow for connections and learning processing to be made more easily because they already have previous knowledge in their memory. This will help learners not be overwhelmed by the new material being presented.
In this example, the image highlighted in green follows the pre-training principle by providing an introduction for the students that include basic terms, definitions, and concepts before they jump into the course and start off overwhelmed. This can be achieved by a simple guide or cheat sheet, or an intro lesson on the basics of the course before they start the actual course lessons.
The Modality Principle states that people learn better from graphics and narrations than from animation and on-screen text. This principle suggests a very important principle of multimedia design. When making a presentation, present words as narration rather than on-screen text. There may be situations where on-screen text is necessary, but instead of including the full text of the narration, you can use bulleted highlights of the most important essential information for learning.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the modality principle by leaving off unnecessary on-screen text, whereas the other image has the on-screen text included.
Mayer's last 4 principles are ways to foster generative processing. They are Multimedia Principle, Personalization Principle, Voice Principle, and Image Principle. Let's take a look at these 4 principles. Here is the foundation of Mayer's principles that we hear so often, the Multimedia Principle. It states that people learn better from words and pictures than from words alone. Avoid using just text alone. Use relevant images that enhance or clarify the information that you are teaching. Do not just add an image for the sake of adding an image. Make sure it is meaningful to your content. This principle helps learners take the verbal information and the visual information into working memory at the same time.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the multimedia principle because it has an image that is presented with text instead of the other image, which is just text without a graphic.
The personalization principle states, people learn better from multimedia lessons when words are in a conversational style rather than formal style. Keep your message simple and casual to help improve the learning experience and make the learner feel more comfortable. Avoid sounding overly professional by using words that are too long and complex for your students to understand. It can also help if you use first-person words such as you and I rather than third person. Keep in mind the demographics of your audience and match your words and tone to enhance personalization. Personalization may also encourage learners to be more engaged and try harder to understand the materials being presented.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the personalization principle because it keeps the message and text simple and is easy to understand, unlike the other image.
The voice principle states that people learn better when the narration in multimedia lessons is spoken in a friendly human voice rather than a machine voice. Technology has advanced to the point that Siri and Alexa are getting close to sounding human, but there is no substitute for a real human voice. It is also important to remember that your audio needs to be high quality. You can achieve high quality sound by using a microphone and audio editing software.
As you can see from this example, the image highlighted in green follows the voice principle because they are using a real human and professional recording equipment to narrate instead of a robot voice as in the other image.
The last principle is the image principle. The image principle states that people do not necessarily learn better from a multimedia lesson when the speaker's image is added to the screen. Talking head videos such as this one are incredibly common, but the logic behind the principle is that relevant visuals on the screen will be more effective than showing the instructor talking. The only real value that a talking head video adds is when the presenter is trying to establish credibility and trust on a presentation, or an instructor who is trying to increase their social presence in an online class. Adding an introductory talking head video at the beginning of the course and sporadically throughout the course will accomplish credibility, trust, and social presence. But limit talking head videos as you progress into the important content of the course.
In this example, the image highlighted in green follows the image principle by using a graphic while providing narration instead of showing the presenter on the screen as in the other image.
Let's review some key takeaways from this presentation. Number 1, learners take in information through 2 channels: visual information with their eyes and auditory information with their ears. Number 2, the dual channels have limited capacity. Cognitive overload can occur if too much information is presented at one time, making it difficult for learners to select, organize, and process incoming information. Number 3, the foundation of multimedia learning. People learn better from words and pictures than from words alone. Number 4, less is more. Keep it simple. Only include information and visuals that are 100% necessary for a student to comprehend the topic. As a big fan of Richard Mayer's work, I was curious to see if he was interested in any other areas to do research in the field of education. Watch this clip to see what area he is interested in researching next.
I think what's happening now or in the future is going to be the development of more principles of how to design multimedia instruction. I have a set of about 12 research-based principles that are based on dozens of studies. But I think what we're also going to do is find the boundary conditions for those principles. By that I mean, when are they most important and when are they least important? For example, many of these principles are most important for low prior knowledge learners. High prior knowledge learners probably don't need as well designed instruction as the low prior knowledge learners. So one thing we find is that sometimes when we partition the learners into low prior knowledge and high, we get much stronger effects for good instructional design with the low prior knowledge learners, which I guess makes sense. But there are a lot of other boundary conditions for a lot of these principles. They're not like laws written in stone. I think they work because of what we know about how the human information processing system works. So there are going to be situations where they're going to be more or less effective. So I think what we're going to find is, as I said, boundary conditions for the principles. And as for my own research, I'm kind of getting interested in educational games, which is, I guess, a little bit of an extension of research on multimedia learning, because most educational games are multimedia and that they involve graphics and words. A lot of strong claims have been made for the potential of games to revolutionize education, but I think those claims are based on pretty weak evidence. So what I would like to do is take kind of a rigorous scientific approach to educational games and try and figure out what works, what doesn't work. You know, are there off-the-shelf games that actually have a positive effect on cognitive skills? Are there design principles for games that would apply, that would help us design games that are more effective? So that's kind of what I've been trying. I have a book that, if I'm allowed to say this, that just came out called Computer Games for Learning, where I try to summarize the research on educational games, looking at what I call the value-added approach, which is taking an educational game and adding an instructional feature to it and seeing, does that help learning? The cognitive consequences approach, which is taking an off-the-shelf game and asking, does that improve a cognitive skill compared to doing some other activity that is not that game? And there are some perceptual skills that can be improved by playing games. And then lastly, the media comparison studies, where people look at learning from a game versus learning from conventional media to see which is best. So in some cases, a PowerPoint presentation can be more effective than learning from an adventure game that's supposed to teach a scientific concept. So I break the field into those three genres of research and kind of look at what the evidence says in each of those.
Thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about multimedia design, Richard Mayer, and Mayer's 12 Principles of Multimedia Learning.